I'm Jennifer Johnson, and I raise sheep for their wool.
Welcome to Whispering Pines Shetland Sheep Farm in western New York State, home to our lovely flock of soft Shetland sheep. We breed and raise our sheep to produce soft, crimpy wool for hand spinners to enjoy. Thank you for liking this video and for subscribing to our channel. People always ask me the same questions. Number 1, why is your Shetland wool so soft? Number 2, why does it feel so different from any other Shetland wool I've felt? In this video, I'll answer that with data, examples, and real-world context. And I'll explain why the source of your wool matters.
This is the question I field every time I'm at a fiber festival. And the question is, why is your Shetland wool so soft? Because usually Shetland wool that I've handled is scratchy. So normally I answer by saying, we're selecting for sheep that have characteristics that make their wool really soft. So things like a lot of crimps per inch, a low micron count, and a very soft handle. So those 3 qualities I can actually measure with some precision. So crimp, which is just the waviness to a fiber, is what tends to make fibers soft. And more crimp per inch is going to give you a softer handle. And I can take a block of wool, put it on a ruler and a magnifier, and actually sit there and count the crimps. For soft Shetland, you want to have more than 10 for certain. I know a merino is roughly 20 to 100 crimps per inch, depending on how fine it is. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the micron. So the micron is the diameter of the fiber, and the lower the diameter, the softer the fiber is going to be. And we can measure that. So what we do is we take samples from our sheep and we send them to a laboratory, and they'll measure all the fibers in that sample that we sent in and send us back a report with a lot of detail about the values that relate to that wool. And like I said, the lower diameter, also known as the micron, people refer to it that way, the lower the diameter, the softer the fiber. And then the third test, maybe not quite as scientific, but I'll take a garment that I made with our fiber or some yarn, and if I can wrap it around my neck and keep it there for, a good period of time without feeling scratchy or really itchy, then that next to skin softness is confirmed. There is a value that 28 microns is the highest diameter that the human can handle in terms of, roughness or coarseness of the fiber. But if I can just take our wool and put it around my neck and I'm happy and comfortable, then it's very soft. So those are the things that I use to describe our fiber. But I thought about the question, why is yours so much softer than any other Shetland wool that I've handled? And it made me think, people are coming to our booth from all different perspectives. So it's possible that they're talking about a Shetland sweater that they felt. They may not even be a crafter. And there are retailers out there. Pendleton is one that comes to mind that markets Shetland products, Shetland wool products. It's possible that maybe you saw a Shetland sheep on a farm and you felt the wool right on the sheep, or on the hoof is what they call it. It's possible that maybe this person bought yarn from Jamieson & Smith. Jamieson & Smith is the premier wool broker on the Shetland Islands. They bring in 80% of the Shetland wool from the islanders, the farmers, and use that in their products. So maybe that's the Shetland wool that you're talking about. Or maybe, you've sourced a fleece from a farmer that raises Shetland sheep. So maybe that's your perspective. Maybe that's your experience with Shetland wool. So the question is, what is the Shetland wool that you've handled? And then I can tell you why ours is so much softer. So are we talking about Shetland sweaters? So it's kind of a departure, but when I was a little kid, we were very poor. And so our mother used to buy our clothes with us at thrift stores. So Mom couldn't stand the idea of us wearing clothes from a discount retailer, inexpensive, poorly made. We would go to, the thrift stores and we'd find Ralph Lauren stuff. That was what she wanted. And I think it goes back to, she was a child of the Depression. And she told me once that she used to have to wear dresses from bags that the flour came in. The flour they baked with came in these cloth bags, and they were decorated, and then the mothers used to sew clothes for the children from that. And Mom was very ashamed. Everybody knew, if you came to school with a dress and a flower sack, everybody knew that that's what it was, and you immediately were labeled as poor, and that really stood with my mother, and she hated it. So it was important for her that we had good quality clothes, and that's the way we did it. But we would go through the racks, and if we saw Shetland on a label, that meant it was high quality, and we knew, to put that over your shoulder, take it to the fitting room, and try it. I do remember that they were always very scratchy, but, we also knew that they were high quality, high value. So that was important. So what I've learned since then is having the word Shetland on a label doesn't mean necessarily that the wool that was used to produce that sweater came from Shetland sheep. So the story is, back 19th century, Shetland farmers would make things with their Shetland wool, and then that was currency. They would buy staples and basics from the mainland, and so the Shetland yarn, or the Shetland products that were made, kind of were assigned of value, of high quality, high value. They were handcrafted from very good wool, and the fact that that became a currency, I think, sort of helped turn the word Shetland into something that meant that. It's very good, it's authentic, handcrafted, and just very high quality. And so I think that name has been usurped a lot of times by certain brands that want to project that image. They're not made from Shetland sheep, right? I mean, it's just probably wool from New Zealand. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not Shetlands. And if you take a look at these brands that I'm showing you here, this is just from a Google search and a web scroll. And there's, they're even disclosing that, it's not Shetland wool, but we're using the brand Shetland to name that product line. So the reason that the Shetland sweater doesn't feel like the Shetland wool that you feel from in our booth is because, number one, it's not made from Shetland sheep, and number two, it was probably run through a mill, which we all know this. It strips the lanolin, which makes the wool softer, and it also dries it out, makes it more brittle so that the cuticles are sticking out, and it's just a very scratchy preparation. So the next possible comparison you might be making to our wool is something that you felt in a store. So roving, or a commercial yarn, or the Jameson and Smith product. So if you bought a product from a brick and mortar store that says it was Shetland, it's very possible that it's not made from Shetland wool. They're just, again, using the Shetland label. I found this company on Google called Harrisville, and I went through their Shetland wool, and they put on there, it's not from Shetland sheep. We just are using the name Shetland. So there you go. It's not Shetland wool. And I did find a few retailers in the UK that talk about buying UK from Shetland breeders in the UK. These would be Black Isle Yarns and Gathenor Organic, but as I'm reading through all their stuff, it doesn't seem like they're focusing on getting super fine wool. They might be, but what you see them highlighting are things like strength, yarn weight, the spinning quality, the color variety. So they're kind of focused on other stuff. So it's possible that they're not as soft because they're just not focused on that. That's not a priority for their brand. So then the other possibility, the other point of view you could be coming from is that you've felt wool from a farm, on a Shetland farm. So then the question I have is, okay, well, what kind of farm was that? Is it a farm that they only have 2 Shetlands, and that person maybe sells the wool on their Facebook page or something, which is great. Who knows what you're going to get there, and we'll talk about that in a second. The second possibility is that they have Shetlands, but they're crossing them with other breeds. And so maybe they got the Shetlands because they like the different colors, because Shetlands come in all these different colors, from white, fawn, mooret, brown, gray, black. So you can get this enormous range of color. So, many times they'll take the Shetland and cross them with another breed. So that might be why it's not as soft. But the third type of farm that you could get your Shetland wool from would be from a breeder that registers their Shetlands in the Shetland registries. And this is probably where you're going to get what is most like Shetland wool. Is from a Shetland farm that's raising registered Shetland stock. That's the profile that's going to have the most impact on the Shetland wool quality. And the reason is they belong to a breed association. They should be following a standard when they make selections for and breed their sheep. So now what I want to do is I want to spend some time, before I talk about why our wool is so soft compared with even those farms, I want to talk about some of these terms so we can lay a groundwork and all be on the same page as we delve even deeper into this issue of the variation with the wool, how it feels from different farms. So the first thing I want to clarify is, what is a breed association? A breed association is an organization or a group of people that form a club, and they are responsible for the stewardship of the breed. So they keep track of an animal, in a breed of animal, and this can be dogs, birds, pigeons, cows, I mean any kind of animal that's being managed and cared for by people can be made into a breed and have a breed association. So one of the things an association will typically do is maintain a registry, which is an enormous database where all the animals have a record number, a unique identifier, and those animals are officially recognized as being part of the breed. The other thing that the breed association does is it sets the standard. And the standard tells you what the breed should look like, how it should perform, what traits it should have. And then the breed association is responsible for making sure as the generations progress that that standard is maintained with those animals. The breed association educates the public, so they're responsible for providing materials, educational materials. So like the Shetland Association generated this really cool poster which shows you all the different patterns that are possible with Shetland sheep. Just that's a small example of educating the public about the breed. A breed association markets the breed and works to bring in new members to their association. They're responsible for organizing livestock shows, and this is where the animals can be exhibited and then also judged by trained judges who know the standard. And when you bring animals into the show ring, they can help you understand where your animals do conform or do not conform to the standard. And it's a pretty constructive situation. If you have a good judge, you can learn quite a bit. And then they always do select the one that most closely meets the standard from their point of view based on what their interpretation or how they read the standard. A breed organization raises funds to keep the organization going and to support all the programs that they offer. And members of breed associations are normally wildly passionate about their animals. I mean, it's not unusual for a member of like the Shetland Sheep Association to talk about, you know, crimps per inch and a micron report and what the frame is and, you know, how wide set the eyes are. I mean, all these things are extremely important to members of the breed association when they are actively involved in breeding those animals, sometimes to an extreme. So what is a standard? I mean, a standard is a word that's used, you know, in every walk of life practically, and what it means is that's the ideal. So the standard in the animals breed association is, you know, this particular document tells you exactly what that breed should look like. What are the traits that distinguish this breed from another breed? And it's a guide that covers everything. It covers appearance, it covers structure, color, temperament. For livestock, it can be things like the wool, the milk, the meat that they produce. It can really cover a lot of different things, but it's all about what it is that makes that breed different from all the other breeds. And some standards will assign points to those traits. The Shetland standard does this, and that way you can understand which traits are more important to be conforming to. And when you're in a livestock show situation, you know, you're going to get scored based on all those weighted traits and get a weighted score based on the values that are assigned in the standard. So show judges are going to read a standard before they step into a livestock ring to judge the animals, usually. They should, and they should be really familiar with it so that they're correctly, you know, educating the public and correctly making decisions so that the breeders that are participating know where they should be tweaking their programs. So some breed associations actually require that the animal meets the standard, and they require you to prove that your animal meets the standard before you can register them. And this is called a performance registry. So what does registration mean? So breed associations maintain a database, and in this database are records for each and every individual animal that is of that breed, where you can prove that it's of that breed. Usually this is by their pedigree or their parents. So if both of their parents are registered to the breed, then the offspring offspring can be registered as well. And this database is maintained over each generation, and every animal that gets registered in this breed organization has a unique identifier, some sort of number or lettering system or something, so that they are all unique, and you can, get information about each individual animal, about their pedigree, and about their progeny, about the animals that they've produced that are registered in the registry.
So here I am in the NASSA database search site. So this is the database for the North American Shetland Sheep Breeders Association. So what I'm going to do, and this is public, anybody can go in here and look. I'm going to click on the sheep search link. I'm going to type in my flock number, which is 955, and hit go. So it's going to filter on only the records from our flock. So here you have the list, and it starts with our first sheep that we ever entered into the registry back in 2002. And you can see here when I hover over these numbers, these are the registration numbers. This is that unique identifier that I was talking about. So in the example, I selected Queen Anne's Lace, Whispering Pines. It's always going to be prefaced with the name of our farm, and this is abbreviated, but it's how they identify Whispering Pines. And then the name that we select. You can't duplicate names. So if I tried to register somebody this year to Queen Anne's Lace, they would reject that. So I'm going to hit her registration number, the unique identifier that identifies Queen Anne's Lace, S23371. There it is up there. What this is telling us is she's had 4 lambs. That's the progeny. So if you click on that, you can see who she had as lambs. That gets in there when I register her lambs, because I have to put in there who their mother is. I also put their father in. This is Queen Anne's Lace's pedigree. So here she is, and she's justified to the furthest left when you look at the pedigree. And then the sire, which is a single S, is Sheltering Pines Mahogany, and there's his unique identifier in the database, and then other information about that ram, that sire. And then the dam, you have to go down underneath the you were looking at, Whispering Pines, Queen Anne's Lace, and where there's the uppercase D, that's for dam. Her dam was Whispering Pines Lily. That was Lily's registration number. And you can see that I can go back. Here's Lily's, we'll just look at the dam here. Here's Whispering Pines Lily's mother. And then, so that would be Queen Anne's Lace's grandmother. Here's the great-grandmother, DDS, and DDD is the dam. And then her great-great-grandmother. So it goes back 5 generations, every pedigree. So we can prove she's a Shetland because all of these sheep in this pedigree are registered Shetland sheep with the North American Shetland Sheep Breeders Association.
Not every animal gets registered. So I've had quite a few rams that we didn't register. I have had a couple ewes that I've looked at and I said, I really don't feel, I don't feel like she should be registered as a Shetland sheep. So that's usually on the breeder to make the decision whether or not they want to register the animals. You don't have to register them, but there is a certain value assigned to having your animal registered, being able to prove that for sure it is the breed that you say it is. And it costs money to register your sheep. Usually every sheep has a registration fee that the NASSA, North American Shetland Sheep Breeders Association, charges a little bit more for rams than for ewes. And so that's a way for them to generate revenue. So if you're getting wool from a farm that has registered Shetland sheep, you should be able to say, this is truly Shetland wool that I'm getting. But still, that doesn't answer the question, is why is ours so much softer than even that Shetland fleece that you bought from that farmer that has registered Shetland sheep. So we're going to talk about that next. It's about breeding. So breeding it's not about going to fancy boarding schools and being able to walk with a book on your head. Breeding is about selecting animals, making choices about which animals you want to have offspring from in order to achieve certain goals. So what breeding is, deliberately with sheep specifically, is you take one ram and however many ewes you want to put with that ram, and you isolate them in a pen, And then you impregnate the ewe, and it's either going to be with a ram or with straws that have been extracted from a ram, so straws of semen that you would artificially inseminate in the ewe, but just one. And that way you can show that this one ram was bred to this one ewe and it produced this one lamb. And typically with breeding, what you're doing is you're selecting which rams and ewes to put together in order to achieve something. And you can be doing this to do a lot of stuff. So let's just say you're interested in getting a lot of milk. So you're going to put a ewe that produces a lot of milk with a ram that came from a ewe that produced a lot of milk, and you're going to put them together. Or let's say I want to have sheep that only are spotted. I'm going to always put a spotted ram with a spotted ewe, and then because spotting is recessive, a whole other color genetics video you can watch, but because spotting is recessive, you know you're going to be getting spotted sheep. So that's, you're breeding, you're making specific decisions about putting two sheep together in order to get a lamb that has certain characteristics. In our program, we were breeding for crimpy fleeces that were fine, low micron, that were dense and had a good staple length. A good staple length meaning, 3 to 4 inches. After you've bred, you're also doing a thing called selection. And selection is where you're selecting the animals that exhibit the traits you most want to generate. So for us, it was, again, super fine, crimpy, dense, good staple length. We were selecting for those ewes and breeding them. And so I do have ewes on the farm that didn't have those qualities. I didn't breed with them. I didn't select those to get bred. The ones that I selected are the ones that had the traits that I liked, or I would select a ram that had the traits that I liked, and I would put him on ewes that maybe I thought could be better. But it was always about selecting the best ones to continue the program forward. And many times we would do a thing called culling, where I would take ewes that didn't hit the requirements and I would sell them to other farms that had other goals. So like, for example, the spotting, I would sell a lot of spotted sheep to people that like spotted sheep and weren't really as interested in, her staple lengths or her density. So there's something for everyone. So that's what selection is. So it's hard because, for me specifically, I kind of get an attachment to the sheep. So, I could still love a sheep even though she doesn't have a terrific fleece, but she doesn't really fit on the farm. She's not really what we're selecting for, so she would, get moved on. So the interesting thing about selection is that regionally, you can see a trend where if farmers are deliberately selecting, they could start selecting for things like, for example, let's just say in a region in the United States, there's a judge that does a lot of livestock shows, and he particularly selects ewes to get blue ribbons who have very, very big frames, even if it's not meeting the standard. But that's just in their eyes, that's what a Shetland should look like. And so people are going to start selecting sheep so that judge picks their sheep. And so regionally, you can see, trends happening within a breed where the certain traits or whatever tend to proliferate more in an area. You sort of see that in Shetlands, and I'm going to talk about the regional nature shortly here, but you can look at a Shetland that has been bred up in the northwest United States, and you kind of can know. And you can also look at Shetlands that are bred in the UK, and they have a definite appearance that's very different from the Shetlands in North America. So there's the selection is actually really important for what the breed looks like over time and how those animals are being selected for breeding. One thing I think that's interesting, and it could influence the wool, is the Shetlands are part of a group of sheep breeds that come from Northern Europe. So there's this region where you've got quite a few breeds. They're all different, coming from different micro-regions in that area. And they all have one trait that's the same, and that is that they have short tails. Most sheep have long tails, and you wouldn't know it because most of the time farmers will remove those tails because the long tail is a health hazard for sheep.
It might seem odd to focus so much on the tail, but it's the easiest trait that you can see that helps put these breeds into the short tail category. Then each breed can further be distinguished by more subtle traits, which are clearly published in their breed standards. So I'm going to briefly expose you to some northern short-tail breeds, where they're from, and how they are distinguished from others in the group based solely on their appearance. So we'll start with the Shetlands. Originally, the Shetlands are from the Shetland Islands. They're known for their fine wool, diverse coloration, and smaller size. They also should have a small amount of wool on the forehead or poll and cheeks. Another short-tail breed is North Ronaldsay. These are located just south of the Shetland Islands in Orkney. They have a very short tail and they look very primitive. Narrow, fine-boned body, and they're very small. The Soy are located on the remote islands west of Scotland, St. Kilda. The Soy is a small, deer-like sheep. The ewes only weigh anywhere from 55 to 65 pounds. The Hebridean, those are in the western islands. They have dark fleeces and are multi-horned. Manx Lochtan, these are located on the Isle of Man. They have striking four horns and brown wool. Icelandic, this breed originated from Iceland. They are double-coated with a very long outer coat, and they don't have any wool on the face. The Spelsau is a short-tailed sheep from Norway. They're often white, sometimes with colored faces. They don't have any wool on the face, and they're known for a sturdy, compact body. Finn sheep are from Finland. Single-coated, a uniform fleece with a medium length, very soft, and a more domestic appearance. They're not as angular as the more primitive breeds. Finn sheep have no wool on the head, and the ewes weigh somewhere around 150 pounds, quite a bit more than the Soy. Gotlands, these are beautiful. They're from Sweden, and they have gorgeous curly blue-gray locks. Very distinctive. Then the Estonian native, these are more towards the east, the Russia-Baltic region, very coarse, double-coated fleeces.
The thing I find really interesting is that the Shetland, distinguishing the Shetland from the other short tails, the wool on the poll, the wool on the cheeks is one big difference. And the other thing I find interesting is that the Shetlands really are the only ones that are described as having soft and crimpy wool. And a lot of those other breeds don't, but it's possible they all came from one breed at one time. I'm really going out here. And I don't think I ever even read this anywhere, but I mean, it's possible all those breeds came from one breed. And so it's possible that sometimes the wool you get out of a Shetland sheep could be because of something that's way back in their genetics from these original ancestors. So, and I say that because they all share that one very unique distinguishing trait of having that short fluke tail. And why is that relevant for what I'm talking about here? And it's because you can be raising a Shetland and something can pop out that's got really long coarse fiber. Really doesn't meet the Shetland breed, but it could still be within the Shetland gene pool because of this population of animals up in the Northern Europe area. I want to talk now about the regions where you find actual Shetlands and you find Shetland registries. So the first place is on the Shetland Islands. And this is where the breed originated. There is a breed organization on the Shetland Islands, and it is called the Shetland Flock Book Trust. And they have a standard, and it tells you how Shetlands are different from all the other breeds that live on the Shetland Islands, mainly Scottish Blackfeets, Cheviots, and Merinos. I've never been to the Shetland Islands. Let's just put that right out there. So I've never been able to tour the farms and look at their sheep. But one thing I know for sure is that 80% of the wool that is produced by sheep on the Shetland Islands goes to Jameson and Smith, and it gets sorted into 5 categories. From rough, and the rough wool is got double coats, long, hairy, very long staple length. And then there's superfine, which looks more like the wool on the color poster that you see. I could show you what it looks like here, but crimpy and fine. That's what the wool sorter at Jamieson and Smith does, is they sort all these fleeces that come in from the Shetland Islands into those 5 grades. Now, from what I've read, only the pure Shetland wool goes into the yarns and the roving that Jamieson and Smith offers. The other wool that comes in is probably the result of crossbreeding. So on the Shetland Islands, they were crossing their Shetlands with Cheviots and Scottish Blackface to get bigger frames and more wool. The fleeces that come from those crossbreeds are going to Jamieson and Smith. Those are usually in the rough grades and are getting used for stuff like duvets, rugs, mats, applications where you need a fiber that's a little bit coarser, has a higher fiber diameter, so that you've got the durability. So I think the key takeaway there is on the Shetland Islands, everyone knows this, that the Shetland farmers that raise Shetlands are crossing them with other breeds to generate bigger fleeces. They're not registering them. So when you look at the shows, there's a Facebook page for the Shetland Flockbook Trust, and they show the Shetlands on that they're bringing to the livestock shows. They look like Shetlands. They're crimpy, uniform fleece. They got woolly poles, woolly cheeks. They don't have long double-coated fleeces. So the Shetlanders are, raising pure Shetlands, but there's also quite a lot of crossbreeding going on there. Now, in the UK, mainland England, let's say, or mainland UK, so not the Shetland Islands, but everywhere else, including Scotland, mainland, there's a large population of Shetlands there, and a very active breed association called the Shetland Sheep Society. So they have a standard. It's called the 1927 standard. And it's actually the same as the standard they follow on the Shetland Islands. It's called the 1927 standard because it was created in 1927 in order to ensure the preservation of the Shetland breed, because of all that crossing that was going on. It was kind of freaking people out. So there is a 1927 standard. And the Shetland Sheep Society has also created, I think in 2000, they created a clarification. It's called the Appendix A. And that goes a little bit further in describing what a Shetland should look like. And it talks a good amount about clarifying the wool standard, because that's so important to the breeders in England and on the Shetland Islands to really have that focus on the wool. There's some really important things that came in that Appendix A. The first thing is it clarified, the standard says the wool should be wavy. And in the clarification, Appendix A, it says wavy was what they meant to say was crimpy. And that I don't know, maybe they didn't have the word crimp back when they originally created the standard. And that longish, so they were saying, the length should be longish. The Appendix A clarified that to say it should be 3 to 5 inches. And it says, certainly no Shetland should have a staple of 7 inches. And obviously, or longer is implied. Which I think that's really interesting, because if you go to any fleece show here in the States, you're going to see a lot of Shetland fleeces that are 7 inches or longer. And then it clarifies it to say the fleece has to be extra fine and soft above all else. So extra fine means low micron, and soft above all else. I think that means, you can feel a fleece and you can feel the hair and the prickle. And then there is some softness to it. But if you ever really feel a soft fleece, like when I'm petting my sheep, they're really soft. I mean, it's not like silky. It's not, there's a lot of different wool describers you can use, but it really has to feel soft. And I think a lot of times people will describe their fleeces as soft when, like, oh yeah, if I run my hand along it, it feels nice. But soft means, you get your hands in there and it's soft and you're not feeling any bits or prickles or anything. So that Appendix A was a really important document, and it really helped to help breeders to hone in on those important traits. And also it helped to make Shetland sheep really be the finest of all the UK breeds, which is what their tagline has been for centuries. So It's a really important thing. So when you look at the Shetlands, if you go onto their Facebook page or whatever, and you look at the Shetlands that are being shown in the UK and in Scotland, those ones are purebred Shetlands, and their wool is nice and crimpy, and they look like what a Shetland should look like. I'm quite certain that I've heard say that they're not as focused on micron as we are here in the States, and particularly with the breeders that are breeding for really super fine fleeces. I think that they're much more inclined to focus on the crimp standard, the fleece length, and then the appearance of the sheep in terms of the woolly poll, the woolly cheeks, and the frame. Because I'm not really sure I know why that is, but I don't think they're as focused as we are onto the super fineness quality. So one reason I think this is the case is because we did send samples of our sheep's wool along with a group of similar-minded breeders over to Oliver Henry to look at, and he said, now this is on the Shetland Islands, he said that he hasn't seen wool that fine come through Jameson and Smith, come through the wool brokers, that kindly, I guess is what they call it. And another data point I have is recently a fancier of our farm went to the Shetland Wool Week, and she brought some of our wool because she bought a fleece from me. And again, the people on the Shetland Islands said that that was something they hadn't seen, that it was so very soft and fine, much softer and finer than stuff that they were producing on the Shetland Islands. So let's talk about the Shetland sheep that live here in North America. Shetlands were imported into North America in 1980 from the Shetland Islands. And what happened was a farmer on the Shetland Islands, a couple of farmers, looked at their sheep and selected 28 ewes and 4 rams that exemplified the Shetland Flock Book Trust standard. And those sheep were physically shipped into Canada first, and then all sorts of stuff. It was all sorts of years before they could bring them into the States. But the majority of the Shetlands in the United States are from that genetic pool. There have been some semen importations since then to help bolster that and, diversify the gene pool. But bringing over semen is hard because there are certain traits that you can test for in blood tests. There's certain traits that the U.S. does not want to import, and so they really screen the ram semen to make sure that stuff doesn't come over. And then it's just a lot. There's a lot of work. It's a lot of process. There's a lot of hurdles and things that you have to deal with. You have to have the cooperation of the farms over in the UK. So it's not like there's, hundreds of different rams coming over every year. It's a fairly isolated and drawn out process. I've never been involved in it, but I've heard from the people that do it that it takes a lot. So there's not been a ton of that. So we're dealing with a pretty limited gene pool here. So even though those 32 sheep that came over looked like Shetlands, they met the standard, they're now isolated over here. And so many of them are kicking out offspring that might look like some of the north tail, the short tail relatives, or might be kicking out, traits that are from the Shetland Islands. The U.S. has a standard. It's the 1927 standard, but there's a couple things that are different. Number one is there's not as much of an emphasis in the U.S. on meeting the standard. The judging across the country is nowhere near as uniform as it is in the UK. All the judges in the UK that are judging Shetlands are all working out of the same playbook. The judges in the U.S. that are judging Shetlands are kind of independent. There's nobody really. We do have a handbook they give to the judges, but it's not as uniform as what they do in the UK. And I can say this because I have some pictures of show winners, sheep winners from the big livestock show in Kentucky, Nail, which is the biggest one. Beautiful looking sheep, but she looks totally different from the sheep that took ribbons at the show where we actually had a judge from the UK come over and help us with judging the sheep. So that's one thing. And so people are selecting that are doing livestock shows based on those trends in their regions here in the States. They're also, I don't really know what's driving selection for most people. Many people are just having lambs so that they can sell lambs and generate revenue that way. And so they're not There's nothing in NASSA that requires, there's nothing in the North American Shetland Sheep Breeders Association that requires an animal meets a performance standard. All they have to do is you have to prove that the parents are Shetlands, registered Shetlands, and then you can register your lamb as a Shetland. In the UK, they have disqualifications. There's some traits that can pop out that say, they'll say you cannot register a sheep if it's got only one scrotum, one testicle, if it's got a deformity of the jaw. There's a bunch of disqualifications. But two of those traits relate to wool. One of them is that the breech can't be hairy and it can't extend up into the body. And that's a disqualification, so you can't register. You're not supposed to register an animal. And if you take an animal that has those disqualifications to a livestock show, the judge will disqualify them. They won't even let them in the show ring. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that in North America, if you're looking at wool from a Shetland in North America and comparing it to the wool that we're producing, it can vary very dramatically. And that's because, like I said, North American Shetland sheep breeders aren't all selecting for very fine, crimpy fleeces. And then you're seeing a lot of variation and a lot of Shetlands that look like Icelandics, that look like blackface, or look like some of these the short-tail breeds that I was showing you before, and they're not culling them or whatever. So that's what you're getting when you're looking at Shetland wool in North America. You can look at a Shetland sheep in North America, and I've even heard people in the UK kind of disparage when I read like blogs and stuff. Not disparage, but just say, that does not look anything like a Shetland, and that's partly that regional thing, it's the selection, and it's also the genetic background of these animals. So the next thing that happened in North America is there was this small group of sheep breeders. We were one of the people in that group. The Fine Fleece Shetland Sheep Association I think most of us are in the U.S. We may have, I don't know if we've got Canadian membership, but decided that we wanted to start a focus on Shetland sheep that have really soft, fine, crimpy fleeces. And it was let me just tell you, it was a very difficult decision. When we got our first micron test back with the flock that we had, there was a lot of really coarse fleeces in there. And it was a bummer because that meant we had to flip the flock and work on getting finer. And that meant selling a lot of ewes that we really loved and were really proud of. But once we went down that road and really committed and never looked back, I'm actually really happy that we did it because I'm a hand spinner and I love hand spinners. There's a lot of qualities about hand spinners that I really appreciate, and I won't get into that. But so for me to get their approval and for me to have hand spinners work with my wool and tell me about the wonderful experience, that is so rewarding to me and it's so important to me. And I didn't get that with hand spinners before my fleeces became the soft, crimpy fleeces that they are today. And I do remember vividly, I was at a show very early on when I started, and I had a little booth and a little small table up front with maybe 2 or 3 fleeces and some washed wool or whatever. And one of the spinners from one of the guilds, who was kind of a big deal, walked by and put her hand in the wool and just said, "Oh, I hate Shetland. It's so scratchy." And I was just mortified and crushed, and obviously I've never forgotten it. And as I would knit my garments and feel them, I was like, yeah, they are kind of prickly. So I feel like the decision we made was, obviously, I feel like it was correct, and happy that we did it, happy that we drank the Kool-Aid and went along with the rest of these fine fleece Shetland sheep breeders that decided that, yes, we want to start to align ourselves more with what's happening in the UK. And actually, the Fine Fleece Shetland Sheep Association kind of took that even a little bit further. So they follow the 1927 standard, which so does everybody else, the NASSA, the Shetlanders, the UK, we all are on the 1927 standard. We're also adhere to the Appendix A, so we align ourselves with the Appendix A. NASSA has the Appendix A as a document, but they're not really aligned with it. It's kind of more there just as a reference. But But the Fine Fleece Shetland Sheep Association has an additional element, and that is that there are guidelines where you get your fleeces graded, you send them in for micron testing, and then you grade your fleeces, and you have to meet certain criteria before you can register your sheep with the Fine Fleece Shetland Sheep Association. So that's a performance standard that is no other Shetland association does this. And so that just kind of demonstrates the commitment the FFSSA has to producing that type of fleece that we're producing. And honestly, that's pretty much the only way you're going to ensure, if you're like buying a fleece online, that it's going to be fine, soft, and crimpy like ours. If it's a FFSSA member that sheep is registered with, and then they give you the grade. And there are 5 grades. Here's the chart. 5 different grades that your fleeces can fall into, that when you register your sheep, they have to be a certain age. I mean, it's a really well thought through program. And then that's what their grade is, so you know exactly what you're going to get. I mean, exactly. Crimps per inch, fiber diameter, the whole package. So let me see if I can bring this back around. So why is our wool so much softer than any other Shetland wool that you have felt? And the reason is we select for sheep that have fine wool, low micron, high crimps per inch, and that you can wear it comfortably against your skin. And we select for that. And we do this because we're producing soft Shetland fleeces for hand spinners to enjoy. So that is our mission, and we take it even further, right? So not only are we selecting for and producing that very soft, fine, crimpy wool, but we're also putting coats on the sheep so that the wool is really clean when you get it. We're providing all the data, the micron data, the photos, the genetics of the animal when you purchase the fleece. We aggressively skirt the fleeces to make sure that when you purchase a fleece from us, there's absolutely no dirty, filthy bits on the fleece, that it's pristine. So that is really our focus. And so that is why our wool feels so different from any other Shetland wool. Any of the other stuff that I'm doing in the booth, the comb top, the mill spun yarns, all that other stuff, it really is just about trying to convert the wool into all the different forms so that hand spinners can see what you can do with that really soft, fine, crimpy fleece. The hand spun yarns, the bats, the comb top. It's all about, getting you a better understanding of what soft Shetland wool is and how it can be used. So hopefully that answers that question. There's a lot of different elements to it, but I think before I close out this video, I do want to say that creating it and doing the research, I spent a lot of time, reading stuff on the blogs and understanding the different associations and how they're different and how they're similar. And really, pretty much now that I'm done with this video, I have a lot more questions. I have a lot more things I want to understand better. So what I'm going to ask you is, if there's something that, that struck you as odd, or that you feel like I need to do a deeper dive on or clarify a little bit more, throw it in the comments and let me know, because like I said, I've got stuff I want to explore a little bit further. I just feel like it's really interesting. But if there's something there that you want me to unearth, let me know. I've got nothing to hide. There's nobody influencing my information that I'm sharing here. So I'll be really interested to see what you took away from this video. So thank you so much for sticking with me here to the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy it, it would help the farm if you could like it and then subscribe to the channel. And when you subscribe, if you want to get notified of new videos as they come on the channel, hit that little bell. Share the video with a friend. You can share by hitting the share arrow, and it gives you a link you can copy into an email or text. And, just keep watching our videos. I get revenue for the farm from our ads because of watch time. So if you wanted to continue to watch our videos, go back into the playlist, watch some of the stuff that I referenced, that would be really great. Thanks again so much for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you can come back soon.